to another episode of the Sumer Sports Show. So again, I'm Tej Seth. Thomas and Eric, the usual hosts of this show, are off in Las Vegas doing Radio Row. Be sure to check out some of the stuff that they're doing. You can go to the Twitter account at Sumer Sports, and you'll see most of the stuff that they're doing in Vegas retweeted on there, so you can see all the radio hits. There's not much, the behind the scenes of what they do after the radio hits in Vegas. So that's staying between Eric and Thomas, but definitely the radio hits are there for sure. And I'm here with the same two people that we were with on Monday. Starting off with Ben Brown. Ben, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Yeah, like you said, I'm probably not as good as Thomas and Eric, but I think tomorrow we'll all be in better shape than Eric. I think he's doing like the red eye basically out of Vegas, 10 p.m. to like 6 a.m. Atlanta time. So I definitely don't envy him overnight. And I feel like, come tomorrow morning, we'll at least be sitting pretty with him, down in the dumps basically from his trip back from Vegas. So I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, I mean, we all have been there. The flight back from Vegas is pretty tough. And we're going to be talking about Super Bowl game where one team will have a pretty tough flight back from Vegas. Sam, how are you doing today? Thanks for joining again.
I'm doing great, Tej, and I'm just hoping that no one asks me any questions like Brock Purdy and Dre Greenlaw have been asked in the chat here. So looking forward to a great show.
Yeah, I mean, Super Bowl Media Day is really interesting because you'll get non-football reporters. So you got some interesting questions there that were being asked to Purdy, like you mentioned. But I thought there were some questions that were also great. Like I think Theo Ash did a great job talking to the players about different scheme concepts that they're running. Like hoping that we can talk about some of that stuff today. So on today's show, with the Super Bowl just a couple days away, we are going to be going through all of the matchups in this game. We're going to be looking at it from all the angles that we can. If you want this in physical form, we have a Super Bowl preview called the Big Game Breakdown because of copyright reasons on the sumersports.com website. So be sure to go check that out. It's 41 pages. It's a PDF. You put in your email, it'll be delivered to your inbox, and it has all of these matchup angles that we're going to talk about today. We're going to do it in audio form, and we're going to start off with the 49ers offense versus the Chiefs defense. So let's specifically look at the 49ers pass offense versus the Chiefs pass defense. I think, Sam, when we were talking, this is the matchup that we're most excited to watch going into this game. So the Chiefs are going to play a lot of man coverage. We assume they play a high rate of man coverage, the fifth highest in the league, and they have the third best success rate allowed when in man coverage. But Brandon Ayuk and George Kittle are killers against man coverage. They both rank top 10 in yards per out run when the defense isn't man. So what are you kind of watching when the Chiefs play man coverage in this game against the 49ers?
Yeah, I think for the matchup of the night is going to be L'Jarius Sneed versus Brandon Ayuk. Brandon Ayuk had a breakout season this year, and as did L'Jarius Sneed, who's kind of came on in the past few years. I'm really excited to watch that matchup, as well as seeing how Trent McDuffie lines up against some of those slot guys, whether that's Juszczyk lining up there, whether that's Kittle, whether that's Debo going in motion. I'm really excited to see how the Chiefs manage that array of talent. It's really a strong on strong, big on big, good on good situation here. And I'm excited to watch that on Sunday.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, the Chiefs have only given up 43.8 yards per game to wide receiver ones this season, which is the best in the entire league. Ayuk averages 80.1 yards per game. If you actually, funny enough, if you average those two numbers together, you get around 61.5, which is Brandon Ayuk's exact receiving prop in this game. We'll get to prop bets at the end of the show here after we kind of break down these angles. But obviously more nuance goes into those receiving lines, but it's funny that that's like what the average shows. So another thing I think to watch in this game is how good the 49ers have been against the blitz and how much the Chiefs like to blitz. Ben, what are you going to watch when those kinds of plays play out in this game?
Yeah, definitely. I think, this could be obviously if we're talking about like high leverage type situations and spots where it very much seems like, one of these two teams could grab like a pretty distinct advantage in the overall game. I do think it's going to be when the Chiefs are blitzing. I do think that, the biggest discussion on Twitter relatively recently kind of brought to the forefront by all of our guy Arjun Menyon has been, the depth in which or the way in which basically the wide receivers from the 49ers kind of cluster in a lot of ways. They have like the shortest basically depth from the offensive line played actually splitting out wide. So in a lot of ways, like I think people are kind of rightfully projecting that Steve Spagnuolo could potentially take advantage of that with some more corner blitzes, because they have been one of the highest, blitz heavy teams from a defensive standpoint. So I do think that is kind of an interesting angle. I don't think there are, a ton of like real value plays, basically, I would say, from like a specific like cornerback or even a safety like Justin Reed potentially getting, a sack type situation. But I think overall, like those are definitely kind of the scenario, because I do think we're going to see some exotic looks from Steve Spagnuolo, very much trying to confuse Brock Purdy in those sort of situations. And I wonder, given that smaller, number of plays, just how that's actually going to turn out for the 49ers offensively.
Yeah, I mean, I think you bring up a really interesting point there, where the 49ers do play with one of the tightest formations in the league on average. I think our friend Anthony Tresh has looked at this multiple times about when you get in those tight formations, it really does help you not show your hand on if you're running or passing. We know as formation width increases, the chance that the offense will pass will also increase. But a good counter for this from the Chiefs side will be those slot blitzes. I think McDuffie has done a great job of those this year. I think the Lions in the NFC Championship game in the first half were having success when they were sending 5 or 6 man pressures, and especially when one of those extra blitzers was coming from the slot or from the back seven. So same when, from your playing experience, from what you've seen from both the Chiefs defense and 49ers offense this year, like where do you kind of land on the Chiefs playing that high variance type blitzing game where they send pressure from the second level, even though the 49ers have been so good against the blitz this season?
Yeah, it's an interesting concept because the 49ers have so many outlets. You have a check down to McCaffrey. You can get it to Kittle. You can run in the screen game. Again, Ayuk is going to be big. Purdy's typically pretty good against the blitz, obviously, because he does have that array of weapons. But again, I'd like to see how Ayuk can impact that, especially if Spags kind of goes into his bag with those corner blitzes, safety blitzes, and so forth and so on.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point. And I think like something that I've seen be brought up on Twitter and also just discussed in this game in general is like, yes, the 49ers have been really good against man coverage. Yes, they've been really good against the blitz, ranking first in EPA against both of those situations, like things that Spags likes to do. But Spags plays man coverage and blitzes in unique ways that is very tough for offenses to take advantage of. And we've really seen that in the playoffs here, where if you were just going into the wild card game of Chiefs Dolphins from a pure matchup perspective, you would point to the Dolphins also being really good against man coverage because of Tyreek Hill's ability to beat man as something that the Dolphins would have advantage of. But obviously in that game, we saw, other than the one long touchdown, the Dolphins offense was pretty limited. So maybe we see something like that in this game as well from the Chiefs defense. But again, it's a very tough battle to fight against the 49ers pass offense. So let's move on to 49ers rush offense versus Chiefs rush defense. Ben, what are some of your initial thoughts on this matchup?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, the 49ers have been like the best team in football from the EPA rushing perspective. This is very much, I would say, kind of been, I would say, like the philosophically sound approach for the Chiefs from the Chiefs perspective, and kind of being, I would say, like allowing a decent amount of opportunities because of light boxes. I think like right now the Chiefs are like 28th in EPA allowed per rush attempt. But I do think, like, kind of going back to it, even with what they were doing against the Baltimore Ravens, like they only had 6 guys in the box on a number of snaps. And for whatever reason, the Ravens like kind of refused to run into some of those light box type situations. And I do think that in a similar vein, we are going to see the Chiefs kind of play that amount of football. It very much seems like, at least early, like the Chiefs are going to allow the Christian McCaffrey 4 and 5 yard runs and hope that they can get, a decent, a fit against the run and kind of get like a 1 or 2 yard loss, or even like a net no gain on any one particular play. And when that happens, obviously the 49ers offense will be behind it. So I think like in small doses, we're going to see decent success from the 49ers offensively, but I'm wondering if that's going to be a little bit of a mirage and a thing that they're going to rely on too much. And then when they actually do need, on a crucial type situation, maybe they aren't going to get what they actually need from the rushing perspective as much, because Steve will kind of, I would say, flip the script a little bit and potentially load the box in those situations, or at least allow a little bit of a different look for Brock Purdy to potentially check out of, and maybe that's a spot that he doesn't actually get there. So I think overall on paper, obviously the 49ers look like they're going to run all over the Chiefs, but in some ways, I still think, going back to it, this game comes down to, Brandon Ayuk having success against L'Jarius Sneed, or the combination of, Kittle and Deebo Samuel and Christian McCaffrey out of the backfield from a yards after catch perspective, really kind of opening up things for the 49ers offensively. Because if it really is only McCaffrey and maybe Deebo Samuel a little bit on the ground, I don't think that the 49ers going to move the football effectively enough, especially on crucial downs, to, I would say, have some long-term success and actually be able to beat, the Patrick Mahomes of the other side.
Yeah, I mean, I think you bring up a really great point there in relation to the box counts that we're going to see in this game, which, if you're at a Super Bowl party and you're allowed to talk during the commercials, this is like one insight that would make you really smart. I feel like if you brought this up at the party, where it's like the 49ers see a ton of heavy boxes because they play heavy personnel a decent amount. Like they don't play much 11 personnel relative to the average NFL team. It's a lot of 21 with use check, or 12 personnel, or they just get into different looks differently. And they get heavy boxes because of that and the McCaffrey effect, right? So they see heavy boxes on 66% of their rushes, which is the fourth highest rate in the NFL. They have a pretty good yards per carry against those heavy boxes, 4.47, which is third best in the NFL. But the one weakness of both the 49ers run game and Christian McCaffrey in general is the tackle for loss rate. When they're facing heavy boxes, they see a tackle for loss on 9.4% of carries, which is the 11th lowest rate in the NFL, but still something that they're not top 10 in. McCaffrey himself sees an 8.7% tackle for loss rate on all rushes, which is 24th out of 60 qualifying running backs. So if the Chiefs are getting in heavy boxes, which they do at the 10th highest rate in the league, and they're able to force a high tackle for loss rate to throw the 49ers offense off a little bit, I think they do have a shot here. But other than that, like you mentioned, Ben, I think that the 49ers being first in EPA per rush, Chiefs being 28th in EPA per rush allowed, still points in the direction of the 49ers as having the advantage. But when you look at this overall, I think there are things that the Chiefs can do in this game to slow down the rush attack. And Sam, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on what exactly you think are those things that the Chiefs can do from a schematic and personnel side to slow down the 49ers run game.
Yeah, I think that the Chiefs excel at a couple things, and that's their defensive versatility all over the field. I think their linebackers do a pretty good job of running sideline to sideline and shutting things down. And typically they're pretty good at stopping runs on the outside, which obviously is a key to the game, to any Shanahan-based offense, is that outside zone run, particularly looking at Trent Williams as someone who can get out on the outside, really make impact blocks in space. So I think the key is kind of settling into your strength right there, in cutting those outside runs off. And obviously that will force them into the pass or into the interior runs, where maybe you can get a little bit more penetration with the blitz. Maybe you have a Chris Jones kind of slip off a block, or a Karlaftis slip off a block and make a big play. I think basically looking at all the options that the 49ers have and kind of chopping off what you're good at, including those outside runs, and including knowing that the Chiefs have a pretty good track record of blitzing, is kind of the way that they will want to lean. Obviously they're not super strong up the middle, but I think facing this multifaceted attack where you're going to get attacked in the run game in multiple facets, you want to kind of keep everything congested, keep everything in the middle, and kind of manage. You can give up a 2-3 yard gain if it means a tackle for loss at some point, rather than something on the outside.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I mean, when you do look at the Chiefs' run defense breakdown, they do a good job of stopping runs outside the tackles, not as good when they're inside the tackles between the center and guards. But I think what is really interesting about the 49ers offense, I think this kind of goes with the 2 weeks of prep that Spags is getting in this game is like they run more frequently behind Trent Williams, and they do it a lot more effectively. Like if the Chiefs are just loading up that left side of the line of scrimmage and then forcing the 49ers to run behind their right side of their offensive line, I think that's like another angle for the Chiefs to kind of work themselves back into the run game. But I mean, it does go back to your overall point, Ben, that you were saying where like the run game will probably be about what we expected. It'll be the pass game that the 49ers offense really needs in this game. But so before we move on to the reverse sides of the ball, do you guys see any particular unit having an advantage in this particular matchup? Or do you kind of see it because of the things that we talked about being a wash? Ben, like, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think it's, I think it's probably like a misnomer that the 49ers are going to have like, kind of like you guys said, like, I think there's going to be sequential runs that do have some success, but as long as the Chiefs aren't like egregiously bad at tackling in this game, I think like the 1 out of every 4 or 1 out of every 5 times that they can get a tackle for loss, especially if it's on early downs, like I think that's just going to set the chain kind of back for the 49ers to the point where they do need Brock Purdy to make some of these throws downfield. So although I would say like the advantage kind of tilts in the 49ers direction, I very much think that, if they're having some success early, that might not be like the strongest indication still that they're going to win that game. Like I do want to see some throws from Brock Purdy early on that are kind of moving the chains as well before I really be comfortable with kind of an expectation that the 49ers can win this game.
Yeah. So, I mean, going back to the last Super Bowl between the Chiefs and 49ers, like I think one of the things that was talked about, after the Super Bowl was like Kyle Shanahan going away from the run a little bit, like towards the end of the game. You had this situation where there was 2 minutes and 44 seconds left. Raheem Mostert ran for 17 yards to get to the minus 32. And then the 49ers didn't run the ball for the rest of the game. They ended up going for a 4th and 10 later on that drive with 1:25 left. Jimmy Garoppolo was sacked. They ended up passing on every single play once they got to the plus 49 and then was sacked. Touchdown was scored by Damian Williams to put them up 11, and then the game was essentially over. So I'm sure that Shanahan has thought a lot about that. And like if you were to do that over again, maybe lean on the run a little bit more in that situation. So maybe we do see some of that in this game. So let's go on to Chiefs offense versus 49ers defense. And remember, if anyone watching live has anything that they want us to answer, we're going to do this matchup angle. We're going to do some prop bets and then kind of do a quick review of where we were right and wrong during the season. So if drop some stuff in the chat if you want us to talk about that in this game. So let's talk Chiefs offense, 49ers defense. Patrick Mahomes obviously is gonna lead the discussion here. But so when we look at this in particular, Sam, like, what do you kind of see with the Chiefs screen game in this game? They have the 3rd highest EPA per pass on screens this season. The 49ers defense is about average at defending screens. Do you think that'll be a big part of their game plan?
I anticipate it too. When you look at kind of the matchup just player by player as we did on Monday, you notice that their 2 defensive ends are really kind of pin their ears back, coming hard upfield, and especially when you're playing Mahomes, who is so good at avoiding sacks, particularly when pressured, and kind of slipping out. You're really going to want to focus those defensive linemen on containing Mahomes and making sure that he's not killing you with his feet, that he's not extending plays and thus extending downfield opportunities. So I expect kind of the counter to that, obviously with the 49ers playing that way. I expect the counter to that to be the screen game, especially with kind of the young wide receivers, unproven. You have MVS, you have Rashee Rice. I expect them to try to get them the ball early and often in space, and I think the screen game is going to be the way to do that. I can also see Pacheco making a great impact on this game through the screen game. I think this is probably the route that the Chiefs have the biggest kind of opportunity against the 49ers in this game.
For sure. Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, the Chiefs threw 16% of their passes this season were screens, and they were good at them. The 49ers faced screens on 10% of their passes, like I mentioned, had an average performance against them. So I'm with you. I think that they're going to use screens a lot on this game. When looking at the 49ers defense and kind of Steve Wilkes's plan in this game, Ben, we know that he plays a lot of zone coverage in general and rushes with 4. Do you see him changing any of his tendencies in this game, possibly playing more man coverage, possibly blitzing more, just because of the way that the Chiefs have done against those this season?
Yeah, I mean, I think you very much have to consider the zone aspect, and kind of going back to, you know, what Sam basically mentioned previously. Like, in some ways, obviously, a zone coverage is going to allow you to spy, or in some ways contain Patrick Mahomes just a little bit better, and not necessarily commit like one particular guy to spy him throughout the entire play that isn't necessarily rushing him. So I think there's like probably 2 competing factions of thought. To me, I think that they very much have to figure out a way of manning up with Kelsey and Rice. But the problem is, like, I'm not convinced, you know, Domador Lenore in particular is really going to hold up against Rashee Rice all game. So I think in some ways, like, this could be more of a blow-up spot for Rashee Rice than anyone else. That is kind of the spot where I do think they have a clear angle. And if that's kind of working and effective early, I think it's only a matter of time before we do see like a longer pass to one of, you know, Marquez Valdes-Scantling or Justin Watson. And that could kind of be, you know, the differentiator between these 2 matchups. And I very much think that the Chiefs kind of have that trump card. And despite, you know, the 49ers maybe throwing some wrinkles in their direction, I don't think it's going to do anything, I would say, to move the needle from a long-term standpoint with what the Chiefs are going to be able to be and successful at offensively. So I expect maybe like a slight uptick in man coverage, but I think that definitely probably comes at the expense. It might be a consideration where we do see Patrick Mahomes, you know, scrambling more in some of those crucial down and distance type situations.
The point about Mahomes scrambling, I think, is really relevant in this game, where you have, if you do play man coverage, especially on late downs, like that's really where we see Mahomes scramble to get those first downs. You know, and he has the tendency to do that more in the playoffs and big games. He only averages 20.3 rushing yards per game in the regular season. That goes up to 27 rushing yards per game in his 17 playoff games. He's increased his scramble rate this year as well from 6.8% to 8%. And then he had 29.9 scramble yards per game this entire season, which is second to only Lamar Jackson. So that is the risk that you're willing to make. Maybe if you're Steve Wilkes, is if you play man coverage and you still feel like your linebackers can chase down Mahomes, even in those situations, if he decides to scramble, like maybe that is the play that you go with. But I do agree with a lot of what you said, Ben. And when thinking about like blitzing Mahomes and blitzing the Chiefs, for example, like you think back to the Chiefs' first game of the 2022 season against the Cardinals, where the Cardinals played man coverage and they blitzed a lot and they got burned for basically the entire game. And teams got pretty scared of blitzing Mahomes and the Chiefs since then. And now you're starting to see that pick up a little bit, I think, because there isn't all those quick, easy answers that are like for sure things because of some of the drop issues that the Chiefs receivers have been having. So, you know, you've seen the Chiefs have the 7th best EPA when facing 4 pass rushers, but the 26th best EPA when facing 5 pass rushers. And that is a smaller sample size for the 5 pass rushers just because teams don't send 5 that much against them. But Sam, is that something that you could see Steve Wilkes doing in this game, is maybe sending 5 pass rushers, even though that's not necessarily the 49ers identity?
It'll be interesting. I think when you're going into these big games, and I think Alex Anzalone did a great job of kind of summarizing this yesterday in the Players Tribune, I believe it was, talking about how the Lions approach the game. You got to stick with who you are. You got guys that are injured, muscle memory, adrenaline, weird timing in the game, which kind of affects a portion that we don't really see as fans a lot. Long commercial breaks, long halftime show, so forth and so on. I don't expect the 49ers to drift too far away from what their identity is, but you always want that wrinkle coming off of a 2-week break. And I wouldn't be surprised to see the linebackers, the defensive backs getting involved in blitzes, just particularly at the beginning of the game, just to kind of throw off the balance of the Chiefs offense. Obviously, against the Chiefs, this is high risk, high reward because you're dealing with two of the greatest of all time, Mahomes and Kelsey, who are basically designed to blow any blitzes up with big plays.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, even adding to the greatest of all time discussion, like I think you really saw the greatness of Andy Reid in last year's Super Bowl in the second half when you have Kadarius Toney being wide open for a touchdown in the red zone and different things like that. So I think it'll also be interesting to watch, how and see how Andy Reid adjusts. Like you mentioned, Sam, like longer commercials, longer halftime, lots of stuff that Reid can do, but it can't not be mentioned that the 49ers are also experienced when playing in a game like this. With some of their coaching staff, they definitely get their coaching staff definitely gets picked apart more than the Chiefs one does. So let's move on to the last angle here before we get into some prop bets. So talking about the Chiefs rush offense versus the 49ers rush defense. Sean has put a really good comment in the chat here, which what I wanted to get to. And he said, teams have had success on the perimeter runs in the playoffs against San Francisco. Do you think the Chiefs lean into that, even though their run game with Pacheco is more downhill / interior? So when I looked at this angle in particular, I'm really glad that Sean brought that up. The 49ers have allowed a 51% success rate to rushes outside the tackles this season, which is the third worst mark in the league. We've seen this in the playoffs, especially 75% success rate on rushes outside the tackles from the Packers and Lions. They did this 16 times, and 6 of them went even for explosive runs, but only 2 of them have been stopped for a tackle for loss. So you think about that side of things for the 49ers defense, but like Sean mentioned, you have a Chiefs outside zone attack that does not do well when they're running outside the tackles. They're a lot better when running inside the tackles because of Pacheco's running style, because the strength of their offensive line is the guards and center. So I think that the Chiefs are going to mix in McCole Hardman rushes in this game, MVS rushes, Kadarius Toney, if he's active, I think could also get a rush or two, depending on how much trust they have. You think back to the Jameson Williams touchdown on the opening drive against the 49ers for the Lions against the 49ers in the NFC Championship game. I think that we could see some of that from Andy Reid. So Ben, do you kind of see that same thing happening with the wide receiver rushes? Do you think the Chiefs are more traditional with how they get to their outside rushes in this game?
Yeah, I would tend to lean probably more towards they're going to be more traditional in some ways, like the guys in which I would expect to come on, like a wide receiver reverse or something like that. I'm not sure are going to be in position to actually do. I guess they could maybe mix in Justin Watson, which I think they've done somewhat infrequently in that area. But I don't know. I would be interested in a prop where if Kadarius Toney was active, if he actually gets to touch the football or not. In some ways, he would have to be the guy, but I just don't know. Given like the fallout from where that has happened, especially this playoff time, like I don't know how Andy Reid could potentially trust him to touch the football, in this sort of spot after being inactive. So I don't know. I'd be surprised if he was active. I'd also be surprised if he touched the football. And then you're kind of like looking at like a Marquez Valdez-Scantling or Justin Watson type situation. I guess they could probably run it with Rashee Rice. But to me, that feels like he's more going to be like an underneath or even like out of the backfield type of player, as opposed to being like the wide receiver reverse screen. So I think it is going to be more traditional. I do think in a lot of ways, like the Chiefs are really just going to be rushing in some ways to set up the pass and allow Mahomes to potentially get out of the pocket from that angle. And that's how they're going to kind of press the edges of where the 49ers are at weakest. But I don't think it's going to be a ton of trick plays until Andy Reid gets into the red zone, and we'll see if he can pull off, the correct play call or not, if he's Drew or Andy coming up here on Super Bowl Sunday.
Yeah. I definitely get what you're saying. Like I subscribe to the theory that, especially now, but even I think a couple of years ago, Andy Reid kind of knew that his team was going to be in the playoffs. So he could save some of his uniqueness, some of the play calls that he felt really good about until the actual postseason. So I think maybe like the 2 weeks off, he gets into some of that in this game. But Sam, what I really want to hear from you is, have you noticed the Chiefs are using heavier personnel to run out of in the playoffs? And like, what have you kind of seen from that new wrinkle that Andy has added in to the run game?
Yeah, I think particularly on the point that Sean brought up, this is where Andy Reid is going to make an impact. When you have such a glaring inefficiency as the 49ers do on the outside run, you got to figure out a way to take advantage of that, whether that's loading up with 13 personnel, whether that's running guys off of sweeps. I have no qualms with Andy Reid. I've no doubt that he will mix in a lot of cool stuff. And in fact, I kind of expect it to appear like the things that they've been doing in the past 2 weeks and have been successful on. And then obviously that will open up some type of play action game. Obviously, if you're running multiple tight ends, you got Kelsey in there. I'd expect in the red zone to see a lot of new wrinkles. As you mentioned, the Kadarius Toney touchdown from last year I'd expect to see something like that come up in the red zone in this game. So I'm really excited because I think Andy Reid has a big opportunity to kind of stray from tendency into a weakness of the San Francisco defense.
That's a great way to put it. I really like that, stray from tendency into weakness. So before we go into prop bets, same question as on the other side of the ball. Do you see any particular unit having the advantage in this game, Sam?
In terms of the Chiefs offense versus the 49ers defense, I don't see it straying too far from kind of the consensus or too far from what we've seen. I expect that the Chiefs are going to continue to try a downfield attack with Mahomes. I think Mahomes is going to make big plays. I think he's obviously an X factor, but when has he not been an X factor in the past 4 or 5 years? I really see this one as kind of more level as will go along with expectation. Whereas on the other side of the ball, when we're looking at the 49ers offense versus the Chiefs defense, I think those are really going to be where the plays that make this game interesting or uninteresting or close or not close are going to be made on that other side of the ball. So to summarize, with the Chiefs offense versus the 49ers defense, I'd expect it to pretty much go chalk with Mahomes making some big plays, Bosa, Warner making some big plays on their end, obviously, but kind of almost a stalemate at that point. And then the other side of the ball really making or breaking this game for either team.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with that. I think that when you look at kind of like the trends of the units that we just talked about, Chiefs offense has obviously been trending up, especially in the playoffs. 49ers defense, I think, especially since the Hufanga injury in week 11, but they've ranked 23rd in EPA per play allowed since from week 12 going forward. So they're definitely going to have to put some good stuff out in this game to get the advantage back. But yeah, I think I agree with you that the matchup and the units that I'm most excited to watch, and I think that will probably decide the game, is 49ers offense versus Chiefs defense. So let's get on to some prop bets here. Again, if you're watching the live stream, and appreciate all of you in here, feel free to drop some prop bets in the chat, and we'll probably be able to talk about them. Ben, as one of the best prop bettors that I know, obviously before joining Sumer, where we're not allowed to bet, but what's one that you really like in this game to kick us off?
Yeah, definitely. I think, I would say just in general, like it is really exciting to be at the Super Bowl, or not be at the Super Bowl, but like be able to bet on the Super Bowl and like kind of diagnose individual angles as opposed to like trying to like understand how your one small, like maybe minute detail that you think it like is not captured within the market could be extrapolated out to like the entire game performance. So I do think very much like the Super Bowl is like a unique opportunity to bet on some of those things where like if you do think the Chiefs, secondary unit and cornerbacks and secondary are going to like blitz at a slightly higher rate, like you could take advantage of that in the prop market, as opposed to like during the regular season, you just don't have those sorts of opportunities. So I do think going way in depth on some of these markets is really good. But like Sean mentioned, like I did talk about this one earlier, it is very much like, the matchup that I'm keen in on, but it is very much like Rashee Rice versus Amador Lenore. If he can kind of take advantage early and often, I think that him, in particular to go over 67.5, Obviously do some shopping around, but I think that, or even his reception prop number, I think is like a really intriguing starting spot for Rice. The question I think becomes from a reception standpoint is like, if the 49ers do keep it close game based on kind of how I see the game script playing out, will he get enough volume towards the end of the game? But if that's kind of your one concern, I do like Rice both over 67.5 receiving yards, over reception yards, and potentially probably to get into the end zone as well.
Right. Yeah, that's a great one. I think when you look at Rice in this game, like the amount of pass plays he's ran routes on has been trending up. He should probably run a route on like 70+% of pass plays in this game. And then he has a better yards per route run against zone than man. So if the 49ers stick to the zone coverage that we think that they're going to stick to, I like that a lot for Rice as well. So kind of going with the same format of putting this together. I really like Isaiah Pacheco over either 2.5 or 3.5 receptions, depending on how much juice you're willing to lay on the over. But I would probably take the 3.5 at plus money if you can get that. I think when you look at Pacheco in this game, he sees about double the target share against zone coverage than he does against man coverage. And the 49ers have given up the 7th most yards to running backs this season. So I think that he is going to get a decent amount of targets in this game and should be able to turn those into receptions. And then while we're doing some sack props here, Nick Bosa under 0.25 sacks. Mahomes barely takes sacks, has the second best pressure to sack rate in the league. I don't think that even if the 49ers do manage to get a sack, which I think is a 50-50 proposition in this game, Mahomes had taken 0 sacks until the second half of the AFC Championship game in the playoffs. But even if they do get a sack, I think that I don't see Bosa necessarily having an overwhelming advantage over that, being Chase Young or Javon Hargrave being the one that actually gets the sack there. I know that the Chiefs tackles are weaker than their interior offensive line, but I still trust Mahomes to not take a sack in this game. And then there's another great sack pop, I think, in the chat that I wanted to talk about as well, which is Tershawn Wharton over 0.25 sacks at plus 300 or greater. With Amenihue out in this game with a torn ACL, I think that someone like Wharton will be able to step up and have a game where he's able to get in the backfield. And when you think about the way that the books model these things, it doesn't probably take into account as much of him replacing a lot of Amenihu's snaps. So thanks for that one in the chat as well. Sam, I was told that you have some bets that you really like in this game also. Why don't we hear them here?
So I'm about the exact opposite of Ben. I'm probably the world's worst bettor in that I've been barred by the NCAA for most of my adult life from betting, and then I've been barred by Sumer Sports from betting due to my work in the NFL. So as a result, I typically will send the Wild Man parlay, which here it's not necessarily a parlay, but just a couple of good picks that I think are fun and will make you look cool if they hit in the game. And if not, you put $10 on it and maybe it hits, maybe it doesn't. So the first I like, which is a little bit more based in fact, is under 259.5 for Patrick Mahomes yards. If we go and look at his game logs in the playoffs, he's been kind of right up at 259, but we have 241 against Baltimore. We have 215 against Buffalo. We have 262 yards. So obviously just a bit over against Miami. I think that this game could come down to a game that is kind of a slow it down pace that we saw in the Baltimore game as well. I think they may end up being a little bit more conservative if they can get up on San Francisco, especially with all the weapons that San Francisco has on offense. I like Patrick Mahomes under in terms of passing yards. Another one, which is getting a little bit more fun, is I just like Deebo Samuel over 16.5 rushing yards as listed by DraftKings. I think it's the Super Bowl. You got to do some fun stuff. You got to do some cool stuff. Kyle Shanahan's one of the best play callers. I'd love to see him mix in Deebo, and I think he will. Deebo's a dynamic player with 2 weeks rest. I'd like to see him hit that over at 60, the over of rushing yards at 16.5. Getting one step a little bit more fun, we're getting into Brandon Ayuk, Super Bowl fastest ball carrier in terms of miles per hour. This one is, again, based in data. He was the second fastest ball carrier last week or 2 weeks ago, I guess you could say, in the conference championships. I think that he's going to have some opportunities with the Chiefs blitzing to get really out in space, maybe get a big yards after catch, maybe some great go routes or something like that. I expect him to be the fastest ball carrier in the game. And finally, another data-based approach, but something you absolutely have to mix into your betting slips this weekend is orange Gatorade. Orange Gatorade. I can't stress this enough. Has to be orange Gatorade. Last year, Chiefs won, purple Gatorade. Can't have the purple. Got to switch it up. A little different team, still the same core pieces who may have an outsized importance on the Gatorade flavor. But if you look back, when the last time that the Chiefs won before last year, they had orange Gatorade. I expect them to bring it back to tradition. They're playing the 49ers again. Orange Gatorade is the decision for me and should be the decision for you on Sunday.
That was phenomenal. The orange Gatorade plus 300, by the way. Everyone is going to be on red Gatorade because of the team colors, because of Taylor Swift being there. Go off the beaten path. Orange Gatorade is the way to go. If you want to stick with the fun bets here, if you want to parlay 49ers money line and Kelsey doesn't propose on whatever book is offering the proposal markets, like I think that's another angle, because you can correlate your in-game same game parlays, and the books take into account the correlation between quarterback, receiver, stuff like that. There's no simulation that you can have for someone proposing after a game. But if the 49ers do win this game, I assume that Kelsey won't propose after the game. You could flip it, I guess, if you wanted to go bold and go Chiefs money line, Kelsey proposes. But I think, again, Kelsey probably not proposing either way, but definitely not if the 49ers win this game. Ben, do you have any other bets before we move on to our last topic of the show?
Yeah, I will say that sounds like the type of bet you could make both sides of, right? The Chiefs in the yes, the 49ers in the no. But obviously it would be a dream if we could parlay some of those. But yeah, I will say, and this was one, Tej, that you actually turned me on to a little bit, but it's Noah Gray. I think you had as the first touchdown scorer. I think like an anytime touchdown scorer of like 7-1. He's played at least 40% of offensive snaps for the Chiefs since week 13. Kind of like the Sumer Sports playoff guide shows, like they've been most efficient from a 12 personnel type of set. I do think that I think roughly 27.5% of their offensive snaps have been from that personnel, and they have thrown the ball, I would say, a heavy amount from that particular personnel. So we've seen, and we've talked about it, Andy Reid kind of near the goal line is going to have, I think, one or two type of exotic looks. To me, I'm imagining, some sort of Travis Kelce jump pass a la Tim Tebow, Noah Gray back of the end zone, cashes it like that. I think it cashes over 2.5. Players to throw a pass attempt, and it cashes Noah Gray anytime touchdown. So I'm liking that as kind of an interesting longer shot angle for the Chiefs potentially in the red zone here.
That's great. Yeah, I mean, again, when we talk about hitting on the edges, things that a lot of people that we know do, thinking about combining over 2.5 players to have a pass attempt with something like Noah Gray catching that touchdown pass is really, really smart there. I love the reasoning for that. So Sam, this is something that you want to do since it is, the last game of the year. We should have some self-reflection. It's probably a good thing to do. We're going to do our best and worst take from the year. So Sam, why don't you start us off? How do you feel about your best and worst takes of this season?
Yeah, so I'm going to start it off with my worst take of the year, which has been panned widely across Sumer Sports. My pick for the Super Bowl included the Saints, which is my team, and I just threw them in there because I like the Saints and I hope for the best. I also thought the Steelers were going to be a great team and make it to the Super Bowl. They ended up having a pretty good season. I honestly expected them to be more in this vein that we see the 49ers in right now, in that, some development from their wide receivers. I thought Najee Harris and I thought Jaylen Warren were going to have great years. That didn't turn out to be exactly correct. Obviously, they're still a great competitor in their division, but didn't turn out to see them in the Super Bowl. And obviously, the Saints versus the Steelers, two teams that didn't make the playoffs. Not a great Super Bowl prediction there. For my best, if anyone follows me on Twitter, I've been on this for a while. I was really excited preseason. I thought Baker Mayfield was going to have a great season and really cash in the offseason. I think that's proven to be true. We'll see what his cap number. We'll see what the guarantees are for his deal upcoming. But the combination of Canals coming in as the offense coordinator, the combination of being with two really great wide receivers, a new spot, trust. You're seeing the early videos of him joking around in press conferences, a little bit of that more Oklahoma loose gunslinger Baker. I was really excited to see him have a really great year and progress my Baker Mayfield agenda.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, you were one of the first people to text me about Jaden Daniels potentially winning Heisman in like week 2 or 3 the college football season, and then Baker Mayfield as well. So I have to give props for that there. So I'll do my takes. Both of them defense related. I had thought that there were a couple like wide tail teams for this season where I thought like they could end up. They had a very wide distribution relative to other teams in the league. You know, I thought like Texans and Packers were some of those teams, but I also thought Commanders was a team that could really hit on a wide tail. So I was in on the Commanders being this team where I thought that they could have a top 5 defense, which they had the worst defense in the NFL. So missed badly there. I thought that Sam Howell potentially could be good and they could be this like 10-11 win team that maybe competes for the division. They ended up with the number 2 overall pick. So obviously was way off there. Definitely my worst take of the year. Best take was I was all over the Browns defense headed into this season, even though the Browns defense had performed very poorly the year before. I saw with the free agent signings that they had bringing in Jim Schwartz as defensive coordinator. I got a little lucky here. That ended up being as good as it was, but I thought that they were going to have a top 5 defense, and assumed some good from the offense, which they ended up not getting, was going to put them in a good spot, but at least their defense turned out pretty well. So, Ben, how about you? What are some of your takes this year?
Yeah, definitely. I think, easily my worst one, I would say was probably the Seattle Seahawks could contend for the NFC West, or just like my entire outlook on the NFC West in general, because I was lower on this 49ers team that is now playing for us in the Super Bowl, basically. So I think just from that perspective, like the NFC West in general, not a good division for me. The Seahawks in particular, I thought they would take an additional step forward with kind of last year's draft class that they had. And I was really excited about where they were at this year. Geno Smith as well. Like I thought they could figure things out defensively under Pete Carroll, and that just did not turn out to be the case whatsoever. So that was a pretty big brick. I also thought, fundamentally, like the 49ers could be a little bit of a worse defensive unit than what they were last year. And then if you just had some sort of expectation that Brock Purdy could be closer to his college form than what he showed in year 1 for the 49ers, like I thought there was a reasonable expectation for them to be down a little bit and the two worlds to kind of collide. But they definitely collided in the opposite way, basically. So I was dead wrong about that one. But as like a pessimistic Vikings fan, I also did think the Packers and specifically Jordan Love were probably going to turn out okay. And I did think the Packers were kind of in line, I would say, to get like the 6th or 7th seed in the NFC. That very much came into fruition. I, like Sam, was also kind of high on the Baker Mayfield-led Tampa Bay Buccaneers, but I got to give Sam all the credit for just like, shoving me in that direction as well. So I think I'll take like a mini bow after Sam's victory lap on Baker Mayfield is all I can really handle from that one for sure.
Well, I mean, I think what's impressive from both you guys here is you were able to identify someone in your team's division that wasn't your team that was going to have a good year and ended up doing like massively exceeding expectations. So, shows everyone out there that like when you know your division well, like you know the types of things that are going to happen. So yeah, I mean that's if you guys have any closing thoughts on the takes on the prop bets on the Super Bowl, feel free to share them, or else we probably can wrap up here and send people towards the big game on Sunday.
Yeah, I would say I think it's noticeable that you didn't call out Udit's comment from very early on talking about Sam Sit here. But I think I said something off air basically that Sam looks like the perfect college basketball play-by-play announcer there with like the early '90s, suede jacket or something, and the big like headphones basically. So I feel like obviously football is going to work out for you, Sam. But if it doesn't, I feel like you have a career in like broadcasting already as well. So if people want him, I'm his agent representing him if they need any commentators, anything like that. So.
Yeah, that's great. Ever since you pointed out the college basketball announcer thing to me, like it's hard to unsee, but it's a good look to have. I think I think it's very, very good look to have on this show. So thank you guys again for joining me here. Again, like it's very hard to replace what Eric and Thomas bring to the show, but I hope that we were able to get at least partially there when we were previewing the Super Bowl. Be sure to check out the other shows that we did. We did a show on Monday. Tuesday was Sean, Syed, and I breaking down some of the biggest questions about the game. And then we have the Super Bowl preview on the site. It's titled Big Game Breakdown. So, be sure to look for that. And then we also have a matchup preview page where you can see that this game has a 99.9% tile watchability score. So the second highest ever behind Eagles, Chiefs in last year's Super Bowl. So that's pretty cool. Should be a very good game because of that. And then, on top of that, we have some cool tools data wise that you can play around with on the site. So, thank you guys again for listening. Ben, Sam, really appreciate you guys jumping on with me today. Hope that it was enjoyable for you guys, and I'm sure we'll run it back during draft season. So appreciate it, everyone. Until next time on the Sumer Sports Show.